Hi, everyone. Why is it that Seneca, a philosopher from 2,000 years ago, remains such an important and wise figure that people turn to for practical real life guidance today? Well, Seneca was not only a wise philosopher, but equally important, he was a proto-psychologist, far ahead of his time. Seneca and other Stoic writers described psychological concepts that weren't even given formal names until very recently. When I was young and in college, I had discovered Marcus Aurelius, but I only discovered Seneca later in life, around 15 years ago. And I think my experience is fairly typical in this regard. What I found so appealing about Seneca is that aside from being a really great writer, he focuses on real life issues. For example, how do you handle grief when a loved one dies? How do you respond to worries or anxious thoughts so you can return to living fully and calmly in the present moment? What is real friendship, and why is friendship so important? And how can we contribute to society? Everything Seneca writes about is timeless and on our minds today. And this makes Seneca seem contemporary. Because he had an incredibly deep level of insight into human nature, he feels like a wise advisor to many readers today, including myself. Over the past 2,000 years, our world has evolved greatly in terms of technology. But when you read Seneca, you realize that human beings have not changed psychologically. We are psychologically exactly the same as people in Rome 2,000 years ago. We suffer from the same kinds of hopes, fears, greed, ambition, and addictions the ancient Romans experienced, but we also have the same desire to become better, more excellent people. And Seneca explores all of this. As a master writer, a master of rhetoric, Seneca is the most compelling of the Roman Stoic writers. And Seneca is the only one of the Roman Stoics who was actually writing for us. We have no actual writings from the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, only summaries of his ideas and summaries of his classroom lectures. And while we do have the wonderful writings of Marcus Aurelius, they certainly weren't written for us either. They were written for himself in his own personal journals, and it's a miracle they survived and came down to us today. So, of the great Roman Stoics, Seneca was the only one who wrote with his readers in mind. And in fact, in one of his many famous lines, after he left working for Nero and was writing in isolation, Seneca wrote, "I am working for future generations." That is, for us. It was an astonishing prophecy of sorts, which actually came true. Seneca believed, with the early Stoics, that real philosophy was a kind of medicine and therapy that could improve and heal human life. The Stoics were concerned with practical ethics, and they asked the question, what is needed to live the best possible life? And if we could answer that question, they believed we could then flourish and live happy, tranquil lives, even in a world that seems to be crazy and out of control. As Seneca himself pointed out, the mind would rather amuse itself than heal itself, making philosophy into a diversion when it is really a cure. And so, yes, there's the academic side to philosophy too, which is certainly worthy of study. But as Seneca pointed out, when philosophy becomes a purely academic pursuit, it becomes something trivial. With this practical orientation, Seneca believed that we should always work on trying to improve our character. Each day, he thought, we should try to make a little bit of progress to become better or more virtuous. For human beings, if you're a Stoic, to be virtuous means to be rational. And a rational person will embody the four cardinal virtues: practical wisdom, courage, self-control, and justice. But in the Stoic view, these virtues can only become realized by practicing them. So it involves working on the process every day, which includes self-reflection. Another attractive Stoic idea is the belief that we can live a life that is truly worth living under any conditions, or almost any conditions. Again, Seneca writes about this at great length, and he writes about how we can make progress each day and come to live a joyful life. So what mattered for Seneca in the end was human nature. For example, how friends can enhance our lives and person-to-person relationships. As he wrote, the first promise of real philosophy is a feeling of fellowship, sympathy, and community with others. And that is why every single philosophical writing of Seneca that has come down to us was addressed to a friend or a family member. That is because Seneca believed real philosophy could make an impact on human life. Of course, at the same time, Seneca was writing for a much wider audience too. He wanted to help his friends, but he also wanted to use his essays and letters as case histories, showing how these philosophical ideas and approaches could be helpful to anyone. After all, it's not just poor Lucilius who suffers from worry or anxiety at times, but nearly everyone. And by focusing on the personal, Seneca also highlighted the universal. Now, if you'd like to explore Seneca's ideas, Seneca's original writings are the ultimate source. But if you'd like an accurate and faithful overview of Seneca's main ideas as a starting point or a reference, I suggest taking a look at my book, Breakfast with Seneca, A Stoic Guide to the Art of Living. And that is based on in-depth scholarly research, but written for a general audience. The title of the book is based on a nice little ritual I developed over many years of reading a bit of Seneca each morning at breakfast. And surprisingly, other people have embraced this practice too. And also surprisingly, the book has appeared in 16 languages. Now, for some reason I don't fully understand, a mini industry has grown up that demonizes Seneca based on his relationship with Nero. And I'd like to say a few words about that. Seneca and other Stoics maintained that we should not make mental judgments unless we are certain about the evidence. And when it comes to the life of Seneca, we have no real firsthand accounts of his life that I'm aware of. In fact, everything we know about Seneca's life with absolute reliability could be written on this: a single piece of paper. For example, Seneca spent an entire decade of his life in Alexandria, Egypt, and we have no firsthand knowledge of what he even did there over the course of 10 years. The only firsthand source for knowledge about Seneca's life is Seneca himself. And the only major historical reports about Seneca were written decades after his death, sometimes many decades. And their accuracy in different ways is open to doubt. But this has not stopped writers from producing biographies about Seneca, even though we only have one sheet of truly reliable information about his life. And it hasn't stopped other people from advancing ungrounded theories about Seneca's character and about he was working in league with Nero. So we do know that Seneca became Nero's tutor when Nero was only 11 years old. And when Nero became emperor, when he was still 16 years old, it's likely that Seneca helped run the Roman Empire for the first 5 years of Nero's reign. And that was a very happy period. Other than that, we have very little hard evidence about what Seneca's relationship with Nero was actually like. Although reading between the lines of Seneca's writings, he did seem to be very unhappy about it. My own view is that Seneca wanted to influence Nero for the good. And when he found that that was impossible, he still needed to stay on with Nero to do what he could and also to protect his own life. So rather than demonizing Seneca for his relationship with Nero, I think we should remain open-minded due to the lack of reliable historical evidence. In a recent interview, however, James Romm suggested, and this is a quote, perhaps, just perhaps, Seneca even helped Nero plan the death of Nero's brother and mother. Well, that's like saying maybe, just maybe, someone's mother was an axe murderer too. And there's not a single shred of evidence to support these kinds of irresponsible speculations about Seneca. And they are very irresponsible too, especially if you believe in fairness and due process. Another writer in the world of modern Stoicism, who is a friend of mine, has suggested that Seneca was not a real Stoic philosopher, but really a sophist, a Latin sophist, because he taught rhetoric. In this view, Seneca only wanted to profit from Nero and hide his true moral character by writing hundreds and hundreds of pages about Stoic philosophy as a way of constructing a false but positive public image. Of course, this is just silly, and there's no evidence to back it up. I've read thousands of pages of scholarship about Seneca, and I've never once come across any serious Seneca scholar who suggested that Seneca wasn't a real philosopher. It just doesn't fit the facts. And Seneca himself started to seriously study Stoic philosophy when he was a young teenager when he first came to Rome. And even the person who published the most inflammatory nonsense about Seneca many, many decades after Seneca's death, Dio Cassius, described Seneca in his own writings as being superior in wisdom to all the Romans of his day and to many other great men. Another problem is that equating rhetoric and being able to speak well with sophism is totally incorrect. Plato, who was against the sophists and mere rhetoric, wrote that rhetoric could be an extremely valuable tool if it was inspired by real philosophy. He talks about this at the end of his dialogue, the Phaedrus. And Cicero, an expert in rhetoric, was certainly no sophist. He was a real philosopher too. And importantly, the teacher of rhetoric who came shortly after Seneca, Quintilian, in a very famous formula said, only a good man can be a true orator. And for Quintilian, a true orator needed to be a widely educated philosopher or even a Stoic sage. Finally, moving on to happier topics, I would like to briefly discuss how Stoic philosophy and virtue ethics could contribute to a better society today based on the revival of Stoic philosophy, which helped to inspire the Italian Renaissance. And if you'd like to read more about this, I have a lengthy article on this on my website, Living Ideas Journal, and the article is entitled, How Philosophy Changed the World. Now, when most people hear about the Renaissance today, they understandably think about art. But art was just a wonderful byproduct of the Renaissance. At its heart, the Renaissance was a revival of ancient culture, the ancient culture of Greece and Rome in Italy, along with the philosophy and deepest values of the ancient world. And in fact, during the Renaissance, they wanted to recreate the ancient world. And the story behind this begins with Francesco Petrarca, known as Petrarch today, in the 1300s, which was a very dark time. Italy was a collection of warring city-states, some led by tyrants. And Petrarch lived through the Black Death, which killed his friends. It killed 60% of the population of Florence. And Petrarch also saw widespread corruption in the social institutions of his time. Now, Petrarch was a devoted reader of ancient literature, and that led him to realize that things had been better in the past and that there had been some kind of social collapse, a collapse of civilization itself, starting with the fall of the Roman Empire. And this was in many ways true, as the glory of the ancient world had been largely destroyed. For example, in the time of Seneca, around 1 million people lived in the city of Rome. But by Petrarch's time, Rome had been plundered in many ways, and it was only the home to about 20 or 30,000 people. So going from 1 million to 20 to 30,000 people, that is a major collapse. And to explain this collapse of civilization, Petrarch invented the idea of the Dark Ages. And Petrarch believed that he himself was living in the Dark Ages too. But Petrarch also believed that the light of ancient learning could be recovered. Specifically, Petrarch believed that the only way to restore a truly civilized world was by reviving the wisdom of ancient Rome and especially its moral philosophy. Now, what Petrarch meant by moral philosophy is what he found in the writings of the Stoic philosopher Seneca and the Stoic inspired philosopher Cicero, both of whom Petrarch read avidly in Latin. And moral philosophy for Petrarch and the Renaissance thinkers, simply put, just meant becoming a better person and creating a better society, which was the goal of the Stoics. This idea of Petrarch's trying to create a better world by reviving the ideas of ancient philosophy was the birth point or the seed that launched the entire Renaissance. And these ideas were largely based on Stoic philosophy. As I point out in my article, How Philosophy Changed the World, the ancient Stoics were very pro-social. But that said, Stoic philosophy had little real impact on ancient society. And the same is true of other ancient philosophical schools as well. For various reasons, the time was just not right. But the seeds planted by ancient philosophy never went away, and they continued to germinate over the course of centuries. And with Petrarch and his followers, those ideas inspired them to transform their world and to create a more virtuous society. And behind this profound social transformation were the ideas of Stoicism and virtue ethics. Now, of course, this did not happen overnight. It took a few decades, but perhaps surprisingly, the transformation did take place. Renaissance thinkers like Petrarch and Leon Battista Alberti produced their own works of Stoic philosophy, and they used the ideas of virtue ethics to create a better world. And while Petrarch believed he was living in the Dark Ages, just a few decades later, people in Florence were writing about how they were living in a new golden age. The project of the Renaissance humanists had been that successful. And the way they accomplished this was through creating a new educational system called the Studia Humanitatis, humane studies, or what we would call the humanities today. So in essence, they invented the humanities, and they got this idea from Cicero. Humanitas was a Roman virtue championed by Cicero, which had many, many meanings. Humanitas meant humanity, kindness, benevolence, civilization, and learning. And during medieval times, you could only study to become a doctor, a theologian, or a lawyer. So the humanists wanted to change all of that. They wanted to create more virtuous individuals, more virtuous political leaders, and a more vibrant and satisfying society. And they wanted to achieve all of this by using the ideas of Stoic philosophy found in Seneca and Cicero, and also by emphasizing humane studies, including ancient literature, rhetoric, and poetry, as a way of supporting moral philosophy and ethical development. And this vividly illustrates how Stoicism did once change the world, and actually how it could do so again today, by emphasizing the values of classical education to create a much better society. Moreover, this kind of educational system already exists, and it doesn't require any religious belief. It can be presented in a totally secular way, and it's already being taught this way to tens of thousands of students in the United States. And education, of course, is the key for creating a good, flourishing society. And one of the reasons the humanities have become largely irrelevant today is because the original goal of the humanities, creating better, more virtuous people, has been totally forgotten. On the other hand, most Americans believe that the quality of public education has declined significantly over the past several decades. But renewal is always possible. And in this renewal, the ancient ideas of virtue ethics could play a major role. Virtue ethics and classical education, a renaissance of the original humanities, are already playing a major role for a growing number of students. So, to learn more about how Seneca, Stoicism, and other forms of ancient philosophy profoundly inspired the Renaissance, please see my article, How Ancient Philosophy Changed the World, on the Living Ideas Journal website. I'm also offering a course on this in November in Florence, Italy, which is nearly full, and you can also read about that on the Living Ideas Journal website. So thank you very much for your interest in this talk, and I look forward to taking your questions now.